afternoon. Everyone, I hope, has had their cup of coffee, because you may or may not need it after this session. It's great to be here, John. Thank you for joining us.
Sumant, anywhere you go, I will follow you.
That's very kind of you. But, you know, I was just thinking back. I think we've done this now about a half a dozen times in the last couple of years. And we've done it in multiple different forums. And it's always been incredible to hear your views on what you're seeing in the world, what's getting you excited. There's obviously a special focus for this audience around the US-India relationship. Yes. We'll touch on that and your thoughts around that, given what's happened in this country the last couple of weeks.
Yes.
But let's just start by something I've always heard you talk about since we've known each other, which is about really identifying and then taking advantage of inflection points.
Okay.
So there's probably a big inflection point we're in the middle of in the world of tech, which is the world of AI coming to the mainstream. How do you think of that? How do you compare that to what you've seen in the past? How have you navigated through inflection points? Like, what would you like the audience to hear about what you've seen happen and what you'd like to see happen?
So basically, my parents are both doctors, and they taught me to deal with the world the way it is, not the way you wish it was. But what I've learned over the years is to watch for inflection points, and that's when you move. In technology terms, when it went from mainframes to mini computers, I went from IBM to Wang. When mini computers went to PCs, client servers, then I went to Cisco to do the internet, and now I'm really focused on AI. The trends are very similar. If you move into a market, if there isn't a business market transition going on enabled by new technology, you're probably going to have a lot of trouble being successful. So the trends are very, very similar to what I've seen every time in my prior career, except they're moving faster and faster. From the mini computer and mainframes perspective, I tried to put it in perspective with the internet 3 times faster. Then you went to the cloud, and now we're going to AI. I think this time you're going to see the market move about 5 times faster, but with 3 times the impact. That has huge both opportunities and challenges. It means nobody's secure. If you're not paranoid, only the paranoid survive. Andy Grove gave us that term, but that is absolutely what you're going to focus on. And you've got to say, how do I differentiate myself in this market? And it doesn't matter if you're a Fortune 100 company or a startup, as several of you are, with 10 or 100 people. You have to say, how do you do this? So in many ways, it's alike. The difference, however, is speed of implementation and the dramatic impact it will have on society.
Now, when you compare and contrast what we've seen happen over the last 5 years in
Yes.
the investments in the world of data centers, or the enablement of AI.
Yes.
And you compare and contrast that to when we saw the fiber being laid and wires being pulled into buildings and the whole concept of the internet coming to life.
Yes.
What similarities do you see? What do you see as being different or more exciting or more engaging this time?
Okay. So in many ways, they're very similar. If you look at the internet era, which we led for 20 years at Cisco, if you want to know how the internet was doing, just watch Cisco sales. And so we were growing at 65% a year, year over year for, again, 80 quarters in a row. It was a good indication the internet was fine. In 2001 with the dot-com bust, when we slowed dramatically and went from the most valuable company in the world, as several shareholders reminded me, to questioning, can I do my job?
Today?
Not today on it, but it shows you when the trends go the other way, it's an indication. And so what you saw was the internet clearly got built out very rapidly and then overbuilt out, and that's what caused the bubble to occur. People say, well, is this a bubble as well? And I don't think so, because I think you're still in the very early innings. Most of the enterprise companies, the service providers, government, healthcare, et cetera, are just starting to do things with AI, and I mean just starting. So I think the run is at the very early innings of that. I think it will have huge impact on the GDP of the countries that lead in that. And I think India and the US should lead together, and we'll talk about that a little bit more later in terms of the opportunity. The difference this time, though, is who might be the winners. Make no mistake about it, at Cisco, we snuck up on everybody. IBM didn't even know we were there until we had 82% of the market. People, Intel, great companies, thought, well, they'll control the hardware and they might let us do the software. and they never made inroads into our architecture on it. Nortel, a great company out of Canada, 24%, unfortunately, the market cap in Canada was Nortel, and because they didn't reinvent themselves, they got left behind. Same thing's going to happen this time. Companies who do not embrace AI and have the courage to change are going to get left behind. 60% of the Fortune 500 will get left behind in this process. And which 60% is going to be is who executes for us on it. So the speed of change is going to be very exciting on it, but I think we're in the very early stages of what this really means.
Which leads me to my next question, which would probably focus more on leadership.
Okay.
And I think I meet people from all different parts of the tech ecosystem who had some touch point with you or Cisco, and the Cisco alumni base has gone and done incredible things. So you obviously hired really well.
Thank you.
And then you and I have sat on some boards where we've seen leaders go through difficult times trying to figure out solutions to these transitions.
Yes.
What's your take on leadership of today versus maybe 20 years ago? And how are things progressing, and what makes for a good leader today? And we'll take that further, but I just wanted your thoughts on that.
Okay. So 4 questions in terms of the sequencing on it. In terms of leadership through opportunities of crisis, let's go to crisis first. I'm a huge believer, I'm dyslexic. And at first I didn't tell people, and then at an audience like this, Take Our Children to Work Day, a young girl came up with about 500 people in the room, and she tried to ask a question, and she couldn't get it out. And she broke down and started crying and said, I'm dyslexic, and she started to walk back to her seat. I followed her back to her seat. Her mother was sitting there, and I said, I'm dyslexic too. Now, here's how you handle it. You ask the questions calmly. You come up and do that. And then I walk back up the stage, and everybody's kind of quiet. And I realized I kept my mic on. And so I didn't mean to disclose that I was dyslexic. But I found out how important it was for people that do have learning disabilities to realize you can be successful. And for dyslexics, it will shock you. 35% or so of the CEOs in the world are dyslexic because you have to go A, B, Z. You can't go A, B, C, D. You lose your place, your reading speeches, etc. So it forces you to do pattern recognition in terms of direction. In terms of leadership, the leaders basically, I think, have an obligation to set the vision and strategy for the company and their culture. And I put more emphasis on culture. I'm a Warren Buffett fan than most people do. I really believe culture ensures your success every bit as much as vision and strategy in terms of the approach. In terms of the leaders, each generation probably is critical of the other generation. They just didn't get some of the things that we got, and I think that's very natural.
They got a lot more, but that's okay.
Yeah, but I think in terms of leadership, this one is more challenging because of the speed of change, and it's a global environment. Before, 92% of the venture capital went to Silicon Valley. You had a huge advantage of being here, and still it's the richest place to be in venture capital with the most experienced venture capitalists behind it and companies you can learn from, but it's much more spread around the world in terms of the direction. So lessons on leadership, vision, strategy, culture, it's all about talent. You get the best talent, you win, you've got to motivate them the right way. I personally believe, especially for business to business, it's about putting the customer first in everything you do on your culture. Then I believe there's no room in this world for small dreams. Shimon Peres was a very good friend for 17 years, the late president of Israel, and who focused on Startup Nation and really got that nation going amazingly well. In terms of our leaders different, tomorrow I'm coming off the leadership board at TechNet that John Doerr and I founded in 1993, 30 years ago. And we founded it to interface to government around the states, but especially into Washington and around the world, about how do you use technology and how important it was for the future of the country to really make that happen. And we focused on giving back. John is very, very generous in giving back, and he's a great friend on it. And we felt that high tech had to stay neutral in politics. And we actually flipped a coin to see who got the Republicans and who got the Democrats. I won't tell you who won on the coin flip. But the point that I'm making is leadership, technology has to represent all the people and really make a difference. So I don't see quite as much focus on society. I see more of the companies, and there's some wonderful exceptions. Mark Benioff, our mutual friend, gives back unbelievable from Salesforce, et cetera. But many of the companies tend to focus on their economic approach and not think about impact on society or giving back. If we continue to do that, government will regulate us, and then antitrust will follow. And they've been very direct, both political parties on us have to do it. Ajay Banga, who you know from prior CEO of MasterCard, now CEO of the World Bank, I said, what characteristics do you admire most in leaders that other people may not talk about? And he said, being humble. And I worry about that a little bit, that the leaders today tend to make Larry Ellison look relaxed. And I mean that as a compliment to Larry and Safra. I love them.
It's not a pleasant experience, let's just say.
Yes. Yes.
We're going to transition a little bit to talk about India and the US, and your relationship obviously with India is well known.
Yes.
And the relationship between the two countries has also developed incredibly well over the last decade. You've
Yes.
been a great part of making that happen.
Yes.
How do you see that playing out over the next decade?
Well, I've been very upfront that when you make transitions, whether you're selling to a company that wants to do a change, it starts at the CEO level. If the CEO, she or he, really understands it and will champion it, you can drive it down through. If they don't, it's hard to be successful. So I made India my second world headquarters 30 years ago. And India always had great talent, but we didn't see the innovation, and it was a slow follower. When Prime Minister Modi came into office, he reset that, and I had the honor of working with him on his digitization plan for the country, and he built his whole strategy around technology. I mean, think about what I just said, an emerging country that people said was a very slow follower, and to build the strategy on digital manufacturing, digital India, startup India, inclusion across 29 states, et cetera, on it, and taking it all the way through the environment. It was the leader that I saw that really made the difference there. And that's when I was honored to become the chairperson of the U.S.-India Strategic Partnership Forum, and it's worked out remarkably well. When I said that India would be the fastest growing economy in the world, everybody said, not a chance. When I said Prime Minister Modi would not only be successful, but one of the most successful leaders ever in India, and people said, no way. And then when I said, after he does that, he will take India to the world stage, and they have. He's one of the top 3 leaders I've met in my life. I personally think he's the best leader in the world at the present time on examples and direction. Now, the challenge will be, can our relationship between our two countries really strategically partner in a way that's never been done before? And the neat thing, people ask me the effect of the election. I think India would be a great friend, a great partner strategically for America, either way it went. But does Trump have a very special relationship with the Prime Minister? Oh, yes. And you watch his appointments. Watch his Secretary of State, Marco Rubio. I mean, that was a clear message. You know where he stands on the U.S.-India relationships. And his National Security Advisor, Mike Waltz, out of Florida. Again, somebody that has been in the House caucus for the India-U.S. relationships. So I think we have a chance to really progress, but we're not dreaming big enough. We're after doing something nobody thought was possible and establishing the most strategic ship in the world, we're kind of feeling comfortable with just good progress. I think we've got to re-examine and really go for it in terms of the direction of the future. When you think about my top 10 priorities for 2025 in terms of predictions, and if you go back over the last 7 years, it's actually scary that we were very accurate on most of the changes that occurred. And that's lucky when you hit them real hard, because if each one of them you have a 60% chance of being right, you all know the math. Again, if you do 10 bets on it, that's a very low probability, even half of them will hit. So you begin to look at what will occur. 2 of the biggest bets that I'm predicting for this next year is related very tightly to India. First, with the U.S. and India, redefine strategic partnerships around aid to be the dominant players in AI together. The dominant players. And that doesn't mean that other countries won't do this, but if we do this right between our 2 countries, we can build it so we're all by ourselves and then pull others with us. The second is, this is the year that I think India will break away on its goal of becoming the #1 GDP in the world, with all the standard of living increases, the innovation increases with it. So there are inflection points and there are multiple inflection points as a country or a company really grows. I think this will be the year that we see that. Now, I know you're going to ask me the next question, which is what are the other 8 projections? The number one projection that I'm focused on is this is the year that AI becomes a key fabric for every industry. And that, if you ask your friends, unless you're in technology, you say, is AI really affecting your life? The answer is probably not. And if you look at companies, and I've talked to 2 board of directors this last week, several customer advisory boards, which I strongly recommend for startups to learn from, they're saying from the non-techno side, we're just getting started on it. This is the year when we're going to cross the chasm. Every industry, from healthcare to defense to manufacturing, will move rapidly on it. The second major projection that I'm making is that this will be the year when you really see AI change the way we work, live, learn, and play. The only time that occurred before, how many of you are Cisco graduates, directly or indirectly? You remember when we said that in '93, everybody thought, you're crazy. And even marketing team didn't like it, but we did. And since then, the technologies have been interesting and good growth, but they really haven't changed our fabric of life. AI is going to do that, but it will do it at 5 times the speed and 3 times the impact.
And John, is that positive in your mind?
Yes and no. And that's the right question to be asking. Are there going to be huge advantages for AI? Absolutely. Is it going to destroy a lot of jobs? Absolutely. My worry is, unlike the internet, when I say 5 times faster than the internet was 3 times faster than predecessor technologies, but we were able to move fast enough with job creation and retraining people, using network academies and others, to adjust to it. I worry this time it may not be. Now I'm going to make it even more challenging. I believe that AI, done operationally right with the right infrastructure, will drive the productivity of companies at 7 to 10% a year. Do the math. That means you double productivity either every 7 years or every 10 years. And if you're only growing at 5% GDP growth per year or even 3, that says there's going to be a lot of job destruction. So we have to really get ahead of this in terms of where we implement it and how we go forward. Indirectly tied, what does that mean to the economy? AI will drive the economy for the next decade and maybe for the century. The countries and companies who lead in effective AI implementation and innovation will have the fastest growing economies, the highest standard of living, et cetera. Those that lag, candidly, will get left behind in terms of the direction.
Interesting stat on that is, this is not mine, this is from McKinsey, is more than 30% of the worldwide GDP growth in the next 5 years is going to come from productivity gains because of these technologies. And now we're sitting on this stage, which I think we both appreciate, where
yes,
you have $1 trillion that has been invested into infrastructure to power this already.
Yes.
Predictably, another $1 trillion over the next 4 or 5 years.
At least.
At least. And even next year, just the 4 hyperscalers have said they'll be about $300 billion.
Yes.
That's a third of all the capex of the US. So if you think about how the US has escaped being in a recession, it's because we've been building data centers like crazy.
I agree in part, but what I agree with 100% is the U.S. is building out its infrastructure. Part of the infrastructure is data centers, part of it is AI companies, part of it is huge research. And so you see, whenever a country has done that, their GDP follows. And so it's one of the things that I'm tremendously excited about. I was just at a startup yesterday, and it's Physical Intelligence is the name of them, and they only started 8 months ago, and their last financial round was $500 million. The valuation is $2.4 billion, and they don't even have plans for a product. But they're thinking about how does this go through. Now, when you have that type of investment in R&D done by some of the smartest people in the world, those countries that do this are going to lead. And so this is why I believe we're very early stage, Sumant, in terms of what we're doing. So
even now we go past your 4 or 5 that you project for 2025. What else are you projecting will be exciting for the next 12 months, John?
I think you're going to see data achieve a new status. Data will be the sustainable differentiation for companies. And what does that really mean? It means you're not going to differentiate on what model you use. You can use a combination of it. You may be able to differentiate a little bit on applications, but data might be your most valuable resource. If you were a, let's say, a delivery organization, distribution, somebody like UPS or FedEx, data may be more valuable than your whole company is today because they know more about each of us than almost any other source, but they haven't used it yet. So several thoughts. For each company, regardless of your size, you better maintain your control over your data. If you give that to some organization, especially a large one, to quote, do it for you, you'll get productivity for a while, but then you gave away one of the few things that was differentiated, your customer set, your employee knowledge, et cetera, on it. So I think data is going to be the new sustainable differentiation, and you really have to think through the implications very careful. What does it mean? The other thing that is different this time is the large companies have never made the transition. You know, mainframes, mini computers, internet. This time, I think there'll be at least 2 of the top 5 AI companies in the world will be one of the big players. First, they're healthily paranoid. Secondly, they're spending $100 billion going after the marketplace. I think that there's a high probability that 2 or 3 of them will be among the top 5.
I agree with you. I think the way they have built their infrastructure and they've invested in these technologies is unprecedented.
Yes.
So part of this Evolve conference was to really create a platform and awareness for Indian corporates to learn more about what's happening in the Bay Area and in the world of technology. Because yes, we now have connectivity between the Indian business community and we have, in the US, we have connectivity between the Indian startup ecosystem and the US startup ecosystem. But I think a lot of the mainstream Indian corporates have not engaged as much in the world of technology. And as they grow, as India grows and they become global entities competing globally, they have to.
Yes.
So what advice would you have for that portion of the Indian economy to
not
become...
the tech community.
Not even...
And not the startups, but the general economy overall.
General economy, yes.
Yeah, it's interesting. You all, when you flash back 6 months from now and you remember the conversation Sumant and I have, you won't remember the numbers, but you'll remember the stories we tell. The story I like to tell here is Bill Gates said very frankly, because he was up in Washington State, he didn't see the internet coming. If he'd been in Silicon Valley, he would have. I think that is true in terms of the Indian multinationals, that because our startup community is so new in India, they're not going to learn as much from the startup community, and there isn't a regular technology group that really talks about how do you change things with cloud architecture, in social media, how do you communicate within your own organization, et cetera. So I take that parallel, excuse me, and bring it to the US. I would encourage Indian multinationals to come to Silicon Valley at least once a year. I would encourage them also to think about startups and making them part of their organization, either loosely coupled or tightly coupled, which most all really good American companies do. I mean, you go through and you want to see what are the top 4 banks in the US doing. JP Morgan Chase, Citi, Wells Fargo, Bank of America, all of them are heavily involved in startups, and they move their leadership around to understand what's possible. Secondly, you probably need to bring in people that, in a constructive way, share both the opportunity and make it understandable, but also push and remind people if you don't change, you get left behind. So I talked to a very large financial organization last week, to their board of directors and to all their management team. And it was after one glass of wine that I could be even more direct with them. But basically, I shared with them that they just were not moving fast enough, and that if they weren't careful, they could get completely displaced. And then we talked about how does a large company embrace technologies such as AI, what does it work? They have a great CIO there, they had some really good business leaders, but what the CEO wanted me to do, both with the board, but also with his own team, is to increase the sense of urgency with examples they could get and get the unknownness taken out of it. My favorite example on the war story is the postal services in every country are the most slow-moving of all the government agencies. Guess what is the most effective AI company in France that is reinventing itself? La Poste. And they are the most trusted brand in France But they began 7 years ago investing in AI, training their people on AI. They shared with their 7 unions, and as you know, France can be very tough with unions, et cetera. All 7 of them bought into the concept of train our employees because they know something's changing here. And if you take the unknowns out and you begin to train them and then give them advanced degrees, that's the approach. That's what they've done. And they've moved into, instead of 18 billion pieces of mail in a given time period, going to 3 billion. And then what do? They said, I'm going to move into packaging. I'm going to move into delivering pharmaceuticals to especially the seniors. I'm going to do food, perhaps, delivery, et cetera. So they reinvented themselves, but they educated their whole employee base on it. That's what I think companies in India need to do, and Canada, the US companies need to do better too. Because the employees know, they can sense when there's a change, sometimes before management even does.
That training may also help with some sort of job security going forward. And I think that
absolutely,
you're either in the system or you're left behind, and I think that's very important. Not sure if it's...
hit a point in that?
Sure.
Cisco Network Academies. Basically, we trained 7.2 million people while I was at Cisco on network academies. On that, it was not social promotion. You had to pass tests. The majority of people definitely missed the first time through. But the minute they graduated, there was a much higher probability they'd go on to advanced education. Most of the people got a raise within a year after they did that. Job security was there, and it took the unknownness out of the internet. And even today, I go to a country like Guyana, where I'm doing a country digitization, where they've discovered 11 billion barrels of oil off the shore. And the president of the country, Ali, who's really a good guy, he said, I've got to think about how do we do certification here? How do we train our population of less than 1 million people to benefit as you get the huge oil reserves coming in? Because most of the time when you have oil or natural resources, the top 2 or 3% of the country make all the money, and the rest of the country gets left behind because housing prices go up, cost of goods and services go up. So they're focusing on about how you do this ahead of time. The CIO for the country was trained on Cisco Network Academies. And you can imagine when he bought his 2 degrees up when I was there, wanted a picture with me, I felt pretty good about my ability to have a partnership with him.
By the way, I can tell you, we've done a lot of business together in the Middle East. Every country you go, and every senior leadership position say, oh, I used to work at Cisco, but I was too junior, I never got to see you. Can I take a picture with you? That's what happens with John. Actually, with our friend Pankaj as well.
It does. It is fun.
So we have very little time left. We have 2 basic questions. Is there anything that you would like to say to the audience we haven't talked about that you think is important to put attention on right now?
Yeah, I think you have to realize this world that many of us, including myself 3 or 4 years ago, would describe as going through abnormal geopolitical issues and technology issues, and that
Economics.
was probably going to, economic challenges, COVID, everything else, that would stabilize and then we get back close to what was before, just an acceleration. I think you have to assume this uncertainty and this speed of movement is permanent. And I think that's the most likely outcome, including the geopolitical stuff, at least in the next decade. The second thing I think we need to think about is you either disrupt or you get disrupted. It's a Spartan world. It's a Spartan world. Deal with the world the way it is, not the way we wish it was. And then most important, I think you've got to dream bigger. I worry that if you don't dream big, you don't accomplish much, you don't differentiate yourself, and then you get lost, or your company goes out of business. So I think we've got to dream and say, how do we use technology really to move forward? I'm not asking you to go learn how to program. The neat thing about AI is AI will do the programming for you. You just need to ask the right questions and say, what am I trying to accomplish, which is why this gets so very excited. So I guess that would be the last point, Sumant. I think we need to dream bigger, both on what India and the US can do. The Indian companies, especially the established non-technology ones, need to dream bigger about how to use AI. And I think our startups together with the companies and with the government leadership, which all sides believe are the right thing to do, can lead the world and change it, not just for the benefit of our 2 countries, but the benefit of the world.
So great. I think this whole day we've been talking about the things we've touched on, which is the world of AI and how things are changing around it, inclusion in that world, the US-India relationships. And with that context, John, if I would say, hey, if you had $100,000 to invest today, where would you put it? You can make it 100 million if that makes it easier for you.
Okay. No, 100,000 is fine. I would split it evenly between Silicon Valley and India. If I were saying which country outside the U.S. would I bet on, you know what I'm going to say, it's India. And if I had to bet on two countries, I bet on India twice. I think India, you control your destiny. You have the natural demographics working where you're going to go from 1.4 billion people to 2 billion. China's going to go from 1.4 to 800 million. India has a democracy with all of its weaknesses, is like the U.S., but it has large strengths. And it celebrates success and really encourages innovation. I think China made a mistake of candidly becoming very top-down dictatorial at the worst time when technology was taking off. And I don't think they recover from that. I think 1-2 economies in the world looking out, we could argue is this in 50 years or 70 years, will be the U.S. and India. I think if India executes well and the U.S. executes well together into the century, you'll see India probably 10% bigger GDP than the U.S., and you'll probably see India 40% bigger than China. I think it's that type of fundamental change. Now, what's the caveat? Do we execute? Because remember, just 5 years ago, most people would have said China the biggest economy and leaders in technology.
Which is why you split your money 50-50, so you kind of have it. But John, as usual, thank you for joining us.
It's my pleasure.
And we really appreciate it, and I'm sure the crowd does too. And
thank you.
Look forward to our friendship. Thank you.